All right, we are continuing our study in Ruth. We have our character study dealing with the specific character of Ruth. Obviously, in talking about Ruth, we end up talking about Naomi and Boaz as well. There are two places on the notes that, once again, for whatever reasons, I missed. Still had a little bit of Melchizedek in there. There were two separate places that had a little bit of Melchizedek on it. I apologize. I don't know why that keeps happening. I thought I deleted it all, but I guess I just missed a couple things. So,
he's without end.
Oh, he is without end. I tell you, he just never goes away. Yeah. All right. So we are in Ruth Chapter 2, and received some suggestions about. Since we spent a little bit more time on Samson, going through some of those chapters. There were, I think, 3 or 4 main chapters about Samson. Just kind of going through and through the story of Ruth, the account of Ruth, and kind of reading at least the majority of it, since Ruth isn't really one of those places we go to very often. So we won't necessarily just kind of skip through. We'll go ahead and read through chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4. So our goal for tonight is to try to finish up Ruth. So last week we were introduced to Boaz in the account of Ruth here in Ruth chapter 2. We see how that Ruth is taking up the leftovers after Boaz's individuals, his servants, had gone through the fields gleaning the harvest. She's picking up behind them whatever's left over so that she can take it home to Naomi. And we see in verse 17 that she gleaned in the field until evening and beat out what she'd gleaned. It was about an ephah of barley. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. So she brought out and gave to her what she'd kept back after she had been satisfied. So earlier here in chapter 2, as Boaz has been talking to her, he brings out some food at mealtime there in verse 14. She sits next to the reapers. There's some parched grain. She kept some back after she was satisfied. And in verse 15, he commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not reproach her. Also let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." So Ruth had actually kept some of her lunch, I guess you could say, that had been given to her. She actually held some of it back after she was satisfied. Okay, I'm sure she could have kept eating, but she was satisfied. She'd had enough. She kept that back so that she could give it to Naomi when she went home. In verse 19, it says, her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today, and where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." She told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "This man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead." And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives." Again, it doesn't specifically say, cousin or whatever. You would generally probably, it was a cousin that we're talking about. But regardless, we have Naomi recognizing. And of course, it's interesting how Naomi and Boaz, all through their dialogue, the Lord is a constant fixture in their dialogue with Ruth. And as we noted last week in chapter 1, when Ruth kind of gives this appeal, "I'm going with you, your people will be my people, your God will be my God," as Dolan kind of observed last week, at that point, whether or not she had a full understanding and full faith of Jehovah, certainly what was clear was her devotion to Naomi. But now that she is in Judea, now she's among the people of Israel, she's being exposed to references to Jehovah all of the time. And Naomi and Boaz, both in their dialogues with each other or with Ruth, are constantly talking about Jehovah, which I think is a very important and certainly not to be missed application of the constant reference to God. Anything through verse 20? Yes, sir.
Maybe by the change of circumstances, maybe whatever reason, Naomi's she's got a different thought process. While ago it was, no, it's Mara, the Lord is dealing bitterly with us.
Yeah.
Now the Lord has not left off his kindness.
Yeah.
Both dead and the living. Reference to her husband and sons who are gone.
Right. It's interesting whether or not being back among her own people may have helped. Because remember when she first comes back at chapter 1, Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara or bitter, because the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. Again, it wasn't that she didn't believe in Jehovah, but in fact, she just observed the fact that, some things had happened to her which weren't pleasant. And in that moment, or in that period of time, she was very bitter over it. But whatever's going on now, again, whether being around her own people, being reminded of the blessings of Jehovah, whatever it may be, maybe it's the fact that Boaz has taken notice of Naomi specifically, or of Ruth specifically. Whatever it is, yeah, it does seem as though Naomi's mind or attitude or feelings perhaps have kind of settled. Maybe she's not quite as bitter as what she was, especially the fact that she's praising Jehovah for his kindness to the living and the dead through Boaz. Yeah. Anything else through verse 20? Verse 21, Ruth the Moabitess said, he also said to me, you shall stay close to my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that people do not meet you in any other field. So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. Now, so we see the consistency of going out every day through the harvest, of gleaning, of bringing home food for her and her mother-in-law. We see Ruth having a mind and focus to work. In fact, we're going to go ahead and cover some of our questions because we're actually kind of pacing ourselves here with the questions. Going to the first question on our notes, what characteristics does Ruth show in her unwillingness to return to Moab? We talked about this last week. In chapter 1, she absolutely refused.
Her commitment to her mother-in-law, that to her is still her mother-in-law, even though her husband's gone.
Right.
That tie is not.
And it's almost as if it's mother and daughter. In fact, Naomi even refers to them as her daughters. And so, yeah, I think you see a lot of the commitment, the love, the devotion to Naomi, and self-sacrifice. We talk about agape, the love that God had for all the world in John 3:16, agape love, that it emphasizes the willingness to sacrifice of oneself for the sake of another, or in the case of John 3:16, many others. The fact that I'm willing to give of myself because I care, and I don't consider what I'm giving up of being any importance in comparison to the benefit it's going to provide someone else. And certainly you see that from Ruth to Naomi. She's willing to leave her home. She's willing to leave everything she knows, her customs and everything, to go to a land, a people that she doesn't know other than through Naomi and her husband, I guess, and understand that your God will be my God. Okay, I will submit to whatever laws, whatever rules are there, because I want to be with you. And so certainly the willing to sacrifice part we see even into chapter 2. Anything through that first question? Second question, how can Ruth's loyalty to her mother-in-law be applied to us today? There's both a physical and a spiritual aspect, I would say, to the loyalty and the characteristics we see from her from question 1 being applied to us now.
She steps up, takes on the role of provider, if you will, even though she could have gone back home and probably had it much easier.
Been provided for.
Her dad's circumstances, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back to a strange place where they had lost everything and you're going to start from scratch.
Right.
But I'll take care of you.
Right, absolutely. And of course, going to a place that she doesn't know, she has no idea what's going to happen, but she's determined, as we see in chapter 2, to work to help provide for them. The fact that you see that willingness to take care of, certainly from a physical perspective, our own families, being mindful of our families, being mindful of taking care of them, putting them in the forefront, but from an even more spiritual perspective, how would that apply? Phileo? How would that apply to our spiritual state? Brotherly love. Yeah. Well, for our brethren, to take care of them when we see that opportunity, to give of ourselves as we see that opportunity, to show that devotion and that commitment. And I think it's a very interesting parallel because Naomi and Ruth aren't blood related, but it's the relationship that existed between them that had nothing to do with blood. It had everything to do with the commitment and the devotion to each other, the care about what's going to happen to each other. And even though we aren't technically blood related, although you could say spiritually through the blood of Christ we are family. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. And taking care of each other, being there to help one another, having care for what happens to each other, that certainly is an application we can take away from how Ruth sees Naomi. Any other thoughts through question 2?
I think sometimes we see talking about Boaz and everything about God's providence and God taking care of them. I see that when I remember what she said, you're my family, your God will be my God. This is something that Naomi has been doing all of Ruth's life together with them. Is he's been a big part of it, to the point that she would come up and say this. That didn't just accidentally happen.
Yeah.
That your God will be my God. How did she know
Who their God was? Yeah.
This is a characteristic that we're finding out about Naomi, about how she talks.
Right.
Her daily conversation, how she realizes how blessed she is, even though chapter 1, she went through a hard spell, a tough spell, she still referenced God.
Yep.
And even if she feels on the bad side, she still referenced God.
Yeah.
That Ruth would even say, I want your God too.
Yeah.
So there's been some teaching there.
At least by example. Yeah.
That's not been told about, but is evidenced by saying, your God will be my God.
Yeah.
That tells a lot about this family relationship that she didn't have with hers back home.
At least it wasn't so strong that it got in the way of anything. Yeah.
You don't talk about God without talking about what He's promised.
Right.
And what they knew about God and what that God had told them in heaven one day. And,
Yeah.
and this was something that, she has forsaken others to stay
Right.
with her spiritual family.
I mean, she's even forsaking her best interest physically. Again, you would think going home to mom and dad and being taken care of there would have been better than her just kind of going off with her mother-in-law, not knowing what's going to happen, how we're going to survive, that sort of thing. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of commitment and devotion there. Yeah. Anything else through that? Question 3, what kind of characteristics can be observed in Ruth's dialogue to Naomi? Of course, that goes back to chapter 1, that statement about your people will be my people, your God will be my God, but I'm going with you. I'm going with you, and we're gonna make this work. Of course, I think a lot of these characteristics are evident all through this, but you've got that selflessness, that unwavering dedication, that commitment to help her, that love she has, self-sacrificial love being a key component there. Next question, what about chapter 2, verse 2 and verse 7 is so different from people today? This is where Ruth is asking to go into the fields to glean. Verse 7 says, she says, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. This is the servant in charge of the reapers responding to Boaz. And then in verse 2, Ruth said, the Moabite said to Naomi, please let me go into the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose side I may find favor.
She wasn't at Bethlehem asking for the government handout.
She was willing to go and work. She was willing to go and work, to do whatever was needed. within the capacity of certainly the laws that existed there, she was willing, she had a mind that was set to serve. Okay, and if that service included her working from morning till evening to take care of her mother-in-law and her, then so be it. And she wasn't trying to find a loophole or a way out or anything like that. She was willing to put in the work. And that's not easy work. In fact, you could argue that that work is even harder than the reaper's work, because she's having to pluck the leftovers. Okay, you think about the harvests that are full, you grab a handful of these harvests and you keep on going. She's having to pick through the chaff and everything to find the good stuff. So, I mean, this is long, arduous work that she's doing. And she's asking, can I please go work? Okay, and certainly this is for their survival. So there's certainly a great deal of motivation there. But she not only asks Naomi's permission, but then she asks permission from the leader of the reapers for the same thing. And I think that's a very telling thought process with regard to kind of the differentiation between maybe generations of the past who were earnestly looking for work, earnestly desiring to work, versus maybe some of the mindset that we see more so in our society, at least right now. Anything I can do to get out of work, I'm going to try to pursue that. Just kind of an interesting difference. Yes, sir.
Our wheat harvest happens in late May, early June. The temperature is pretty warm.
Yeah.
So we may not even think about how hot it would be to go out and do this manual labor.
All day under the sun
That's why
there.
she started early in the morning.
Yeah.
And gathering what she could gather. That was their law, to leave some aside for those who need it.
Right.
And she was one of those. And
Yep. And of course, as we noted last week, I mean, this puts Naomi in the lowest, at least economical status, because she has no male to provide for her. She has no husband, no sons to take care of her. And so it's all, and you know, of course, Naomi's you would think is older. She's probably not as able to get out on her own to do this stuff. So Ruth is having to do this stuff for her. And of course, we see as Boaz's reaction later on, just how generous he is in this whole thing as well. All right, why was Boaz so kind to Ruth? Not only did he take notice of her, but he even tells his workers we see in verse...
Impressed with her character,
yeah.
besides her labor effort.
Yeah, it would seem that he's impressed with... And the fact that she's a Moabitess. Okay, she's not a Jew. The fact that she's this committed to her mother-in-law, she has this much love and devotion, the fact that she's this willing, just kind of puts her, maybe, especially from the mind or the perspective of a Jew, it makes her stand out from any other Gentiles. That this one's different. She's she's more like a Jew, I guess you could say, in that she's submissive to their law. She has this great love for her mother-in-law. And then the fact that Boaz tells his young men, let her glean even from the sheaves. In other words, don't make her wait for the leftovers. Let her glean some of the big handfuls of stuff. Let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Okay, now for Boaz, that's like just throwing money on the ground. And yet Boaz is willing to allow that to happen. Leave it that she may glean and do not rebuke her. I can only imagine the looks on the faces of the reapers like, what are you talking about? Why would we do that? And yet, that's what he's telling them to do. There's nothing in this, so far through chapter 2, there's nothing in this. Is there anything in here that demonstrates a inappropriate attention from Boaz? Inappropriate thoughts toward her, lust of any kind? Do you see any of that from Boaz? Okay, no.
I think he sees, she's working, but there's also the fact that, his heart tells him, who she is, that she is with Naomi.
Right.
He makes the connection back to that there's a familial connection there.
Right.
He feels a responsibility as well.
I think that's exactly right. The fact that you've got Boaz, who not only recognizes her character and her devotion and willingness to work, but the fact that she's family. Okay, for all intents and purposes, if Naomi's family, then by extension, even though her husband is dead, Ruth is family now too. And so Boaz is going to do what he can to make life a little bit easier on them, to try to help take care of them, which speaks volumes about Boaz as well, doesn't it? Even though we're not focused on Boaz specifically, it speaks volumes about Boaz's willingness to take care of his family, of recognizing, and as we're going to see in chapter 3 and chapter 4, his devotion to Jewish law, his willingness to do the way things work so that there's no claims of inappropriate behavior or no claims of doing anyone else wrong in the family. He's going to do everything according to the law and go out of his way to have witnesses as well, which I think is very important. Anything else through that question?
You're talking about gleaning. They were responsible for leaving some in the fields for those poor and everything. I mean, that was part of the Jewish law.
Right.
It talks about Leviticus.
Mm-hmm.
But he went over and above
To purposely leave stuff behind is a little bit beyond. That's going above and beyond just what the law required. That's like throwing money on the ground. It's one thing to let stuff slip through your fingers. It's another thing to allow it specifically to fall out. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else about that one?
To Nicholas's point, she's not going to be the last straggler at the back end line. You stay right up here with my handmaidens. The kind of idea of bringing her into
Kind of the
family,
fold.
his household, or
safety.
Safety. Yeah.
There's an element of danger,
Sure.
possible harm to her.
Sure. Out there by herself. Instead, she's going to stay with the main group, being taken care of, being recognized as being taken care of by Boaz. Also provided some safety as well. Yeah. All right. Next question. What observations of character can be made in considering chapter 2, verse 14, where she's given this meal, she holds some of it back after she's satisfied, and then verses 17 through the end of the chapter, where she brings the what she was able to glean back to Naomi. She tells her what's happened and so forth. She gives Naomi what she held back from her own meal. She gives it to her. What do you see from Ruth there?
Like I said, they've been in a destitute state almost, and she could have made her feel.
Right.
Plus,
Yeah.
not taking anything back, but she did what filled her up, made her, suffice her,
Yeah.
and then held back what she still had.
See, and to me, that shows that Naomi is forefront on her mind even when she's out there in the field working. Okay, when she's allowed a break to eat and she's given food, she's not just thinking of fulfilling her own hunger, but she's thinking of Naomi. And of course, whatever work went into preparing bread or whatever else was involved in the barley and the grain and so forth, whatever she received to eat was already cooked or made or whatever, all the preparation was already done. So she holds that back specifically for Naomi. And it just shows the great forethought, the care and consideration of thinking ahead for the sake of not just yourself. I'm going to hold this back and eat this for dinner, okay? Sometimes leftovers from lunch. I'm going to save this for dinner. No, that's forethought, but for Ruth, I'm going to hold this back and save it for Naomi for when I get home so that she can have something to eat. And it just speaks to the mindset of Ruth, the virtuous nature of her love and care for Naomi. It really says a lot about her mindset and her thought process, and that it's not like she's trying to steal anything. She's not trying to hold anything back. She gives it all to Naomi. Here's everything I got today. And I think that says a lot. All right, anything else through that one? Moving on to chapter 3. Chapter 3, we have some interesting things happening. This is where more of the culture of the Jews at the time speaks. In fact, even the writer of the book of Ruth even mentions I think this is actually in chapter 4, something that apparently had changed by the time the writing of Ruth took place. But they focus on this is the way the culture was. This is the way that things worked. And so it's interesting how this is all going to play out here. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 3, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies. You shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do." Now, for us reading this is weird, all right? This is, what in the world is she telling her to do? Obviously, we see in verse 2, or verse 1, talking about seeking security for you. I want you to be taken care of. All right, so here's what I want you to do. Boaz, he's a member of our family. Of course, now Naomi is aware, and of course Boaz is aware as well. I don't know if Ruth is, of the rules and the laws regarding the Jews and the death of a husband when there's no heirs or no children that had been born to that husband, and how the family's supposed to handle that so that children can be born to them, and so forth. I don't know if Ruth is aware of this, but Naomi obviously is. And she says, this is what I want you to do. Here's where Boaz is. Wait until he's eaten and drunk and he's prepared to go to bed, or he has gone to bed, and then you go where he lies. You lie down at the foot of his bed, or on the floor next to his bed, or however that worked. You uncover his feet. I guess he's got a blanket on or something. You uncover his feet, and then he shall tell you what you should do. She said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. Again, I'm of the persuasion Ruth has no idea what this is about. In fact, for the most part, you and I probably, really, from a cultural perspective, we can't possibly understand this. But what we can glean from this is what? What's the implication here? What can we gather from the process that's being told to her to do and what's going to happen in chapter 3? What can we learn from implication? It's a very specific ritual. Yeah, it's a culture. It's not a law thing. Okay, I can't find anything in Leviticus or Numbers about in the law, God, this is what God says to do in this situation. This is a cultural thing. Okay, it's some kind of a cultural ritual that is done, and it's recognized. In fact, the moment that Boaz wakes up here in a minute, he's going to immediately understand what she's done. Whether Ruth does, I don't think she does. I think she's doing what Naomi tells her to do without question. And to me, that's one of the most impressive parts about this. And we note that of people of faith all the time, that without question, like Abraham offering Isaac, without question, they did what they were told to do. And it shows the trust and the reliance of Ruth on Naomi, in that Naomi knows her people, she knows the culture, she knows the rituals involved, and she knows the law. And so whatever Naomi tells me to do, I'm going to do. So what we see in verse 5, all that you say to me, I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor, did according to all that mother-in-law instructed her. Verse 7, after Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was cheerful. Doesn't mean he was drunk with like alcohol. That's not what that means. Just he had eaten and drunken what he had to drink. His heart was cheerful. He was full. He was ready for bed. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of the grain. So she came softly, uncovered his feet, and then laid down. So, in verse 8, it happened at midnight that the man was startled. I don't know if his feet were cold. I don't know how that happened, but he woke up and turned himself, and there a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, who are you? It's dark. Remember, it's not like they had night lights and stuff. Who are you? She said, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. Now, again, Ruth knows enough to understand that this is something having to do with security for her. She has gotten that. Whether or not she's fully aware of what this means, I don't know. But this phrase, at least in the New King James, this thing, it says, spread the corner of your garment over your maidservant. But it's not literal, it's figurative. Okay, there's nothing inappropriate that is being suggested here. It's recognizing that there is something within the culture, within the law, that gives you the opportunity to take care of me. Okay, again, whether or not Ruth is fully aware of this, I don't know. Of what that entails, I don't know. Perhaps it is. Okay, perhaps she does at this point understand what's going on. Again, it's hard to say. But we see in verse 9, she says, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Okay, that's what she refers to herself as to Boaz. She's a servant. I'm your maidservant. She says, take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a relative, or close relative. He said, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. I think that's an interesting statement from Boaz. What does he mean by you've shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning because you didn't go after young men, poor or rich? What does he mean by that? It's not just the fact that she's a Gentile, okay, living in a Jewish culture now, but the fact that she could have easily forsaken Naomi, gone after whoever she wanted, and yet that's not what she did. And Boaz is recognizing whatever this rule was, this ritual was, Boaz recognized it as being the request that you take me as your wife and bear children to me in the name of my dead husband. Because that was the rule in Judea among Israel, that's how that was supposed to work among the family. Okay, so that children could be raised in that family according to that husband's name. Well, she is making this request, again, via the recognized ritual. She's making that request of Boaz. Boaz immediately understands what's happening. He says, blessed are you of the Lord. Note it again, talk about how often both Naomi and Boaz talk about Jehovah. You have shown more kindness. Now, I don't think it's just kindness to Boaz. I don't think that's what this is about. I think this is you have shown more kindness to Naomi at the end than at the beginning. It wasn't just that you came with her, that you've taken care of her, that you've helped provide food for her, but now you're doing what is required for continued security for her. Again, as we're going to see at the end of chapter 4, Naomi's going to be taken care of as a part of this as well. Now, I don't believe that that's Naomi's, I don't think Naomi has any ulterior motives. She said back in verse 1 that I want security for you. Okay, I want you taken care of. Okay, Naomi's older, but Ruth is young. She should have a family and so forth. I want security for you. Well, Boaz says, you've shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, and that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. Instead, she's submitted herself to the culture of the Jews, and in the process, she's going to end up taking care of Naomi. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now, her request, earlier up in verse 9, I'm your maidservant, take me under your wing. But I think also entailed in the request was the actual, what was being talked about in the ritual itself. Okay, the ritual itself of all that comprises, taking me as your wife, is basically the point. And so when he says, I will do all that you request, for all the people in my town know you're a virtuous woman. Even though she's a Gentile, okay, she's a Moabitess, despite that, she is a good woman. She has been taking care of Naomi. Everybody knows Naomi, and now by extension, they also know Ruth. And I will make sure that you're taken care of. But the way he goes about doing that is going to be very telling with regard to the wisdom of Boaz. Verse 12, now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. So notice Boaz's thought process here, that according to the law, okay, I'm not allowed to do this unless the closest living relative says no. I can't take that responsibility. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. Again, verse 14, she's lying at his feet. There's nothing inappropriate, nothing untoward here. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Again, he wants to preserve her reputation, I guess you could say, the understanding of what's taken place. It was all according to the law. It's all done according to ritual and custom, but still he wants to make sure nothing untoward is even thought. And so verse 15, also he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her, and she went into the city. So hold on, take your shawl, and I'm going to basically fill your shawl up with food before you go home. And in fact, he even says something to her that isn't recorded here that Ruth is going to tell Naomi. Verse 16, she came to her mother-in-law and said, is that you, my daughter? She told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. It's amazing to me that even though Boaz is, he's a close relative, but it doesn't necessarily sound as though like Naomi and Boaz have known each other for, decades or something like that, or that he was like the brother to her husband, that's her brother. It doesn't sound like there was that type of a close relationship, but she knows Boaz's character. Okay, both first as a Jew, but also as Boaz of this family, the family of Elimelech. She knows his character, and she knows he will not rest until this matter's taken care of today. I thought that was really interesting. That she knew. She's like, this is not gonna kind of fester for a week or so. You're not gonna be held in the air for a while. You're gonna know by the end of the day how this is gonna play out. So I thought that was really interesting. But you see, kind of it puts us here in the 21st century a little bit kind of looking back, trying to really truly understand the culture and trying to understand all of the intricacies and the complexities, I guess you could say, of making sure the law is fulfilled, making sure custom is maintained, and yet still have a good outcome for Naomi and Ruth. And so it's really an interesting dynamic, I guess you could look at from a modern perspective, seeing kind of the way they had to go about taking care of this stuff. Thoughts or comments? Nolan?
Side note, kind of interesting, he gives her 6 days worth of barley.
Yeah.
Since they had a 7th day of do not work.
Right. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Yeah. Of course, 7th day being Sabbath, they weren't to work on Sabbath, so she had a whole week's worth of food that she was given from Boaz. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments through that? Yes, sir.
So, there's a little more insight to Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 8, as far as this custom is concerned, where God does the same thing for the nation of Israel, and he ties in the idea of covenant. So we see the furtherance of what this is leading toward.
Interesting. What was that chapter and verse? Ezekiel
16, verse 8.
16, verse 8? Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Let's take care of the question then. Why was Ruth to lay at Boaz's feet? I mean, there's some one commentary that suggested this is a sign of submission and subjection, and yeah, I guess you could say that's true. I mean, from some symbolic or figurative perspective, laying at somebody's feet would show, submission, I guess. But why did she lay there?
She was told to.
She was told to, and Naomi told her to do that, presumably because this is what the culture demanded. Okay, this was a cultural ritual.
First step in a courting.
First step in one of the strange courting elements contained within the taking care of a family member who didn't have children, I guess you could say. I don't think this would be a typical courting type of thing, but in this situation it would be. I would say this was a cultural tradition, cultural ritual. Maybe contained within it is a symbol of submission or subjection, but that's the way it is. What kind of character is shown in Ruth being willing to become the wife of an older man? In fact, that's one of the things Boaz even brings out. He apparently is it sounds like he's a fairly older than she is. So what does this say about Ruth? She told Naomi, all that you command me, I'll do. What does that say about her?
More concerned about taking care of the situation than her own well-being.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with lust of the flesh. It had nothing to do with, I'd rather have a younger guy. This was about taking care of Naomi. This was about abiding by the law as she said she would. Your people will be my people. But the implication of that is your culture will become my culture. Your traditions will be my traditions. And I will submit to that. And that's exactly what she's doing here. Her willingness to submit to that. And certainly to acknowledge that Naomi wants her taken care of, but Ruth wants Naomi taken care of. And in the end, they both end up taking care of each other through this process, which is how it's supposed to work. All right, we'll stop there. We will finish Ruth next Wednesday night. Thank you, everybody.